Joining us now, once again, is our good friend. We always love having her on the show, Dr. Lynn Parramore, author, cultural theorist, producer, and media consultant, founding editor of New Deal 2.0, of the Roosevelt Institute, co-founder of RecessionWire.com. She writes for a lot of outlets, including Alternet, and she's been writing a lot of great stuff lately. Lynn, you've been making some observations on the economy from your usual. Well, first of all, thanks for joining us. It's always great to
Oh,
have
pleasure
you.
to be here.
So, listen, I wanted to talk to you about a number of things that you've written lately. You've been really cranking out a lot of good stuff, but
Thank you.
yeah. What is it? Caffeine?
Yeah, it's called feeding the beast, as we say at Alternet. The show
Oh
goes
man.
on, and it goes on quite rapidly.
So, oh yes, it does. I know because I write there myself. In fact, I've got something up there now myself, but I've been bumped by your marriage piece, right? Being the top slot.
Ah,
I did a
yes,
piece. I did a
yes,
piece on
indeed.
strange libertarian ideas. What have you been writing about the economy lately?
Well, I recently did an interview with my friend and a mentor of mine, Bill Lazonick, who is an economist who teaches at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. And he's been a big critic of something called shareholder value ideology, something that kind of started in American business schools in the 1980s that held that the purpose of a corporation was to maximize value for shareholders. And a lot of sort of unpleasant things for the rest of us have come out of that way of thinking, including a trend of stock buybacks, which is when a company uses cash to repurchase its own shares. And in doing so, they are able to manipulate stock prices in a way that enriches executives of the company. It's one of the ways that executive compensation has been boosted so dramatically in recent years, and it happens at the expense of workers and taxpayers. So he just came out with a big article in the Harvard Business Review, which is a good sign, actually, that this question is being raised in outlets like that have been traditionally, sort of more aligned with free market type thinking. So he has provided some insights into that, and I really have come to the conclusion myself that stock buybacks are a very bad idea.
And stock buybacks are something. It's interesting. This concept of the moral obligation to the shareholder. It's reflected in the shift in executive compensation that you mentioned, and it's basically another way to look at it is that. And I wrote a piece recently about the Institute for Policy Studies. They did a recent report on executive compensation because the Obamacare law does something to try to address that, and so this issue came up for me. That piece was helpful to me, but there's even beyond the economics of stock buybacks being a bad idea. There's a kind of, I don't know whether to call it an ethical question or I mean certainly morality is part of it, but the question of what is the responsibility of a board? Is
Yes.
it, obviously they're shareholders themselves, so the most selfish would be to adopt that philosophy, but that seems to be a departure. I mean, I wasn't around 75 years ago, but it seems to me there was a traditional, no matter what people think, but there seems to be a traditional view that a corporation and its board had an obligation to the workers, to the customers, to society as a whole. I mean, obviously, yes, they have to maximize profits. That's their fiduciary responsibility. But are you really seeing a shift in value systems as well as bad stock practices?
Yes, indeed. And as you mentioned, prior to the 1980s, a CEO of a public corporation, for example, would not be caught dead stating that the purpose of the corporation was to maximize profits and value for shareholders. And then even this idea of fiduciary duty is a really contested idea. There's a long-standing belief that that a company has some kind of legal obligation to maximize profits for its shareholders, and that actually is not the case. It's only the case in a very limited circumstance in which a company is going to be sold. And if you think about it logically, the reason for that is sometimes it is in the long-term interest of the company not to maximize shareholder value at a given
Right.
time. Investments have to be made in research and development. Maybe the stock is going to take a hit for a little while. Investments need to be made in workers. And so, to more to your point, the shareholder value ideology sort of maintains that shareholders are the only ones that are taking risks in the company, and that's not true. Taxpayers take a great risk in the monies that are spent on things that help corporations do business, everything from infrastructure, to education, to research and development. How would the pharmaceutical companies exist without the research that goes on at the NIH, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And taxpayers don't have any guaranteed return for that investment at all. Workers often work above and beyond the call of duty in investing their time and energy into the creation of new products, and so they deserve to share some of the profits. And so when the money is used by the company to repurchase shares, it is at the expense of all those other parties who do indeed invest and deserve something back.
Well, and this is such a huge point. I mean, everybody watches, what's that movie? I'm going to blank on it now. The Jimmy Stewart Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life.
Wonderful Life,
and
yes.
I've always said, and he's a banker in that movie, and I've always said, by the way, that if he was Jamie Dimon, or he's standing on that bridge waiting to jump, if he was a modern American banker, he should jump. But the notion there is that he's beloved because he puts the community into his decision-making process when he makes business decisions. And obviously that's a sentimental example, but you're absolutely right. One of the striking things about the shift in executive compensation, the shift in board compensation too, as boards have increasingly profited from more and more from being on the board of directors of a large corporation, the fact is, even fiscal responsibility is sometimes, as you point out, long-term. In other words, that fiduciary responsibility alone doesn't even mean this quarter. It may mean my responsibility is to make sure this corporation is sound 10 years from now.
That's exactly right. And in order to do that, you may need to take that cash and invest it in the development of new products. If you look at a company like Apple, they've been doing an awful lot of stock buybacks in recent years, and many people have noticed they haven't been doing an awful lot of producing new products that people want to use. There's a feeling that, they have not been as innovative as they may have been, and some suggest, including my friend Professor Lazonick, that the stock buyback emphasis at Apple has something to do with this. So another issue is that, you mentioned who sits on the boards. Well, the way we do things in the United States is not the way it's done in other parts of the world. In Germany, for example, publicly held company, you've got to have workers on that board. They get to help make the decisions about how resources are allocated. And that might be something that would be a good thing to adopt in the United States, that not only banning the stock buybacks, but making a rule that workers get to sit on the board and participate in decision making.
Well, I was a senior executive at one, and this is by way of a transition. I was a senior executive at one company. We used to meet with the board regularly, and the members of the board, who were well compensated, included a former Democratic White House chief of staff, a former Democratic governor of a Western state, former director of a major U.S. intelligence agency, a couple Republican politicians, and then a couple other 4 pals of the CEO. So net result, as you can imagine, was 1, a lot of rubber stamping of CEO decisions, and 2, a lot of help overcoming political obstacles. And I guess my point, yeah, you know where I'm going. And so don't we need some public policy as well as, corporations aren't going to reform themselves. The money's too big. The temptation's too great. Boards aren't going to reform themselves. CEOs aren't going to reform themselves. Don't we need a public policy initiative here? And don't we need to name and call out people who participate in this process from the political side?
Oh, absolutely. I think that kind of pressure is very much needed, and we need to, as a society, remember what we are owed, and remember what these public corporations owe us. There's all kinds of ways that American corporations are getting out of fulfilling their obligations to society, whether it's stock buybacks or reincorporating overseas to dodge taxes. And they would not exist if but for the largesse of the American government, and taxpayer money, and worker investment. So we need a mental shift, and yes, we need policies concerning corporate governance that, for example, make it illegal to do these kinds of stock buybacks. Maybe, there would be a couple of exceptions for special circumstances, but in general, to ban them and to make a rule that workers should sit on boards. And I agree with you. These corporations are not going to do it themselves. The executives are mostly self-dealing in the short term. And guess what? If they run the company into the ground by doing stock buybacks and failing to invest in the future of the company, they'll be gone before that means anything to them. CEOs could jump ship. They do it all the time. They have the golden parachute to save them and screw everybody else. So that's the way we've been doing things here, I think, much to the detriment of our economy and our society.
Well, well said. And I think, we've got the, I think of it as the Independence Day model of finance driving this too. We remember the movie Independence Day, the giant flying saucers would come in and just suck anything of value out of a planet and then just leave this rotting husk and go on to the next one. I mean, that has become an essential part of whether it's, I think Bain Capital probably pioneered it, but you have these funds now who will come in and just milk a company for profit, sell it, leave it so leveraged, take a huge consulting fee and then leave it so leveraged with debt that it struggles to survive. But in the meantime, all the executives and board members, as you say, have cashed out and gone home and left that as someone else's problem, including the economies, the overall American economies. So, assuming you agree with that, and then we'll take a break. But if you have any closing
absolutely,
thoughts,
I agree with that.
If you have any closing thoughts on that, then we'll come back with the sex with robots and all that stuff. But
Yes, just very briefly, this is one of the things that's driving inequality in our society. All the gains being funneled to the top, and everybody else being left high and dry. And the stock buybacks is just one example, but a very egregious example about how this is done. And it's certainly something that needs to be reformed. Fortunately, people are beginning to pay some attention to it, and I do think when the Harvard Business Review comes out with an article criticizing that ideology, we may be seeing a shift in thinking. I'm feeling hopeful about that.
Well, where can people go to read a little bit more about this from your end?
They can go to find my interview on Alternet with William Lazonick. I believe the title of that is, let's see, CEO. The dirty little secret of how CEOs enrich themselves at your expense. You could also pick up the current issue of the Harvard Business Review at your newsstand and see an in-depth article by Professor Lazonick on the topic.
All right. Well, we are going to take a brief break, and when we come back after this, we will be talking, as people who have heard our previous segments with Dr. Parramore know, everything is economic, even sex with robots and temporary marriage. So we will be back on those subjects and whatever else comes to mind. We always love having her on the show with Lynn Parramore. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour. Right, this is Richard RJ Eskow, and during this break, we will be having one more random news segment for you. Random news of the week. A new report in the International Business Times says that the discovery of 15 new monuments has transformed the mystery of Stonehenge. The article says scientists have made such great strides in decoding what's going on there, the mysteries of Stonehenge, if you like, that one of the ancient world's most ancient relics is now better understood than ever before. A new study said that the new study is called, I believe, these Stonehenge Hidden Landscape Project. It says that researchers found 15 new monuments around the 4,000-year-old ring of standing stones in northern England. The 15 hidden relics included hedges, pits, ditches, and barrows. Barrows are mounds of stone and dirt which are used to mark a grave or graves. These findings suggest that Stonehenge was not just an isolated place which was only visited for rituals, but which was what scientists once thought, but was once bustling with all kinds of activity, as the article puts it. You know who knew about this long before anyone else? Spinal Tap. Remember the Spinal Tap movie and their Druid song? Remember how they introduced it? This is one of my favorite bits from any movie, I think. Remember hundreds of years ago, before the dawn of history, I love that line, hundreds of years ago, there were a people called the Druids. And we now learn that a ritual life was a central part of ordinary community life, or at least it appears that way based on these new discoveries. So we will keep you posted on events in Stonehenge. As Spinal Tap put it, no one knows who they were or what they were doing. But someone knows what the CEO of Centerplate Corporation was doing in an elevator this week in a horrid video that went quickly viral. Elevator video shot from above from those little security cameras. The CEO of Centerplate was seen kicking a dog on a leash that was doing absolutely nothing wrong. It's sickening to watch. I encourage you not to watch it. Kicking a harmless dog on a leash who was lying down and trying to make himself as unthreatening as possible while this jerk continued to kick him and then dragged him out of the elevator. He insisted that this was not part of his nature and that he was merely frustrated by the behavior of a friend's dog. Well, it turns out he was still lying because it wasn't a friend's dog. It was his dog. The Humane Society went to his home that night, found the dog, which was his, and took it out of his care. The corporation responded to that by saying that they were going to send him in to anger management. But the question is this. First of all, what will the consequences be for the CEO? What will the consequences be for Centerplate? There was a recent article suggesting that people were no longer going to buy their products. A reporter went out to... what they do is they sell concession food and so on at ball games. And a reporter went out to a ball game, and a number of people said that they weren't intending to buy a hot dog while they were there. But the real question we have to ask ourselves is this: isn't that the kind of behavior that we're encouraging in executives nowadays? In other words, isn't this guy merely playing to type? He says it was out of character, but our system is designed in many ways to encourage this kind of aggression in executives and to celebrate it as somehow being an ideal. That's what we got to think about, as well as protecting the innocent animals and other creatures of this planet. So we will be right back after this with more from Dr. Lynn Parramore. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.